All right, well, nearly there. The election day looms ahead of us
Final stretch.
like a ship in the night. Any lasting memories, regrets?
Oh, look, I would have liked to try and get a hold of a major party politician or two in one form or another.
Yeah, the seat between us remains empty.
Yeah.
We tried.
Not for lack of trying. We made various inquiries.
To the leaders and shadow leaders of the majors.
And certainly with Labor, at least, we approached various ministers and whatever.
Yeah, some quite directly in person or tried to, at least.
For sure.
And yet, here we are.
We're
Making do with the independents, who I have to say are a much more interesting bunch.
Well, that's
in my
right.
opinion.
At the end of the day, you're probably going to get more of interest out of these kind of minor party independent figures. We've been locked out of talking to the mainstream politicians.
Yeah, it's interesting because they've been doing everything they can to get on every mainstream media outlet they can lay their hands on, and also playing quite a comprehensive social media game. I mean, the skill with which they've been engaging in new media is,
well, they're all over my feed at least, but I don't know if that says something about them or something about
mileage
me.
may vary.
Yeah, I mean, look, we heard whispers that they were making the rounds of podcasts, popular podcasts in Western Australia, and approaching them. And some of those podcasts didn't want them.
They've certainly been frequenting the studios of the corporate media, of the state broadcaster.
That's right.
Roger Cook was taking up a fair bit of airtime on the ABC this afternoon.
Yeah, so you heard it. Did you have anything interesting to say?
No, actually, I mean, he copped a fair bit of heat, to be honest.
Right.
I mean, I think the typical listenership for ABC Perth in the afternoons probably trends a couple of generations older than I don't know. Well, maybe it doesn't than our demographic. I've really got no data to back that up. But
I mean, I got to say, I turn it on when full frequency gets a bit too hectic on RTR. I switch over.
Well,
so,
I tell you
I might not be the only one.
I had a red hot listen to the morning show on the ABC this morning, driving into the city. Basil Zemplis and the Housing Minister John Carey were duking it out. But, Basil and John, if you're listening, we have a seat here waiting for you.
Right here, yeah.
Yeah, you check your emails. Bloody open your inbox. But I've got to say, yet again, yours truly locked out by Auntie. I called in, tried to put a question to the Housing Minister.
With your own name, or did you take on a pseudonym?
I didn't have to. They just know my number. They recognise my number. It's not so many fucking press releases.
Yeah.
I called.
You're flagged with the same thing that Guy Rundle is flagged with in the system. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. I called and got put on hold for 3 minutes, and they said, "Oh, hey Jesse, sorry, mate, no, we can't do it. Got no room for you." So I gave it another crack in person this afternoon. Not much more luck, but we're not the only ones who can't get on the ABC by all accounts.
That's right. Our guest on the podcast this week was similarly locked out from talking to major politicians on the ABC.
He wanted to get into the leaders debate, he said, and we're talking, of course, about Dr. Brian Walker.
Dr. Brian Walker.
Lead Senate candidate, or lead upper house candidate, I should say. We're still in the state political arena, not the federal election yet. Lead candidate in the upper house for the Cannabis Party.
That's right. So he's up for re-election
For now, at least.
This weekend. He's hoping that he can pick up some more seats for the Cannabis Party.
Yeah.
And he was disappointed. Brad Pettit was invited. The major parties were invited, obviously. So the major parties are the Greens, but the Cannabis Party was not on the bill for Nadia Mitsopoulos's
we've got,
broadcast.
looking around, we've got a lot of space on the couch up here at 266.
That's right. The
in
viewers
South
may not
Freo.
know, but these couches
it goes a long way in either direction.
These
are very well framed, tight frames. The shots we work with.
We could kind of have a 3-on-3 debate if we wanted to.
We could have had almost the entire upper house ticket, I reckon.
For at least
for all
the
minor
crossbench,
parties, at least. Yeah.
So, it seems like independent media is locked out from talking to the mainstream politicians. The independent politicians are locked out from talking to the mainstream media.
I guess it's a match made in heaven. We've got to go it alone.
Yeah.
Independence Day, and I suppose we'll find out this weekend or maybe afterwards. How many seats the major parties lose to people who are willing to be a bit more fast and loose and freewheeling.
And politicians are sometimes more willing to talk freely after the election. So, maybe someone from one of the majors, maybe even Baz might want to come here and unpack how it all goes.
Who knows? He knows my number too, so let us know. But I thought Brian was pretty open-minded, really.
Very open-minded. I enjoyed quite a broad-ranging conversation.
Yep.
Talked about matters of foreign affairs.
Indeed.
Talked about psychedelics and various dimensions of that.
Yeah.
We talked about a lot of things. So
higher planes all around. Let's give it a spin.
I did wonder if we should kind of go full Joe Rogan mode for this episode and
go for it.
Get a few blunts out and kind of. But then I realised that if I did that, I'd be an anxious mess. So
and tell me,
it wouldn't work so well.
What makes you think you haven't got THC on me just now?
Well, I have no idea.
I mean, I was trying to decide what I thought you had been ingesting before coming in this morning. You seem, for a man about to face 2.5 million voters, you seem remarkably calm and collected. What's your secret?
Actually, just trusting that we've done the work, the confidence that this is a message which people want to hear, are happy to hear, and will increasingly need to hear, and let's just let the people have the voice. There's no point in getting upset. I can't pretend about anything or make huge claims. What we do have in the way of offers for the public based on legalizing cannabis actually has so far been ignored entirely. And okay, let's just wait and see, what do you need?
So, forgive my ignorance, but I was kind of under the assumption that cannabis was already legal in WA, because I seem to know quite a few people who have prescriptions and are taking it. So what is exactly the legal status at the moment of cannabis in Western Australia?
Well, it's perfectly legal to be prescribed as a medicine, provided you can afford it and provided you can find the doctor who prescribes it. So it is technically legal, not that available and not that accessible, because the cost, of course, is something to bear. We've got not just the cannabis and the dried flower, we've got capsules and tablets and inhalable rosin cartridges and edibles. Gummies are coming on more and more. There's a wide variety of options there. All of it's available. Just when was the last time you got a script from your doctor?
Well, personally, I haven't, but I've got family members, I think, who've got chronic pain, who are currently I think the edibles are quite a popular option at the moment. So clearly, some people are able to access it at least. Is it kind of something that's becoming more widely accessible? I mean, I suppose what I'm really asking is there a point in time in which the Legalise Cannabis Party sort of puts itself into quiet retirement?
Interesting question and assumptions as well. Yes, first of all, the amount of cannabis prescriptions has increased. It's exponential.
Right.
There's a lot more in the way of scripts coming out. The number of doctors prepared to prescribe remains fairly low, between 2 and 5%.
Right.
That's difficult. And the problem is that the endocannabinoid system, the underlying function behind the cannabis as a medicine, that system, which all animals have, that is not yet taught in medical schools.
Right.
And you might ask the question, why? We can teach about the opiate systems, but we can't teach about the cannabis systems. What's the fundamental difference? Because the endocannabinoid system, its function is to balance the body, homeostasis. And we should, in fact, be ingesting cannabis on a regular basis, as we used to do in the past. And it's something which we're depriving ourselves of.
So you think everyone can benefit from ingesting cannabis?
It's a healthy healing herb. You can benefit from ingesting broccoli as well.
True.
Highly recommend that.
Yeah. So when we talk about legalised cannabis, do you want, to what degree are we talking? Like, do you want it to be so that I could go down to the health food shop and, buy myself a joint? Is that the kind of situation?
Well, if you think that smoking cannabis is the best way of using cannabis, you'd be sadly mistaken. There's a lot better ways of doing it. But yes, I think we ought to be treating cannabis just like we're treating tobacco, just like we're treating alcohol, and just like we're treating some of the quite deadly drugs that's selling over the counter in IGA.
Such as?
Panadol.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you think the more widely accessible this is, some kind of regulate. I mean, a lot of those things we regulate, tobacco, alcohol, some form of regulation, perhaps.
Well, again, that's a very interesting question because there's a number of options. If you look at what's happened elsewhere in the world, we get an idea of what possible uses we could find. I think there's a much, much bigger picture than simply regulating cannabis for personal use, whether medical or just recreational. But let's stick with that for the time being, because that would, if we did a calculation, the first ever of its kind in the world, I believe, UWA helped us with that. And it showed that if we were to legalize recreational cannabis, just that, recreational cannabis, we'd get over the 4-year forward estimates of a simple budget, we'd get $1.25 billion for the state.
Right.
Wow, look out, iron ore. This could be the next...
Well,
Next
funny
boom.
you should mention that, because if we're dependent on a single export commodity, let's call it resources, not just iron ore, and then think about what's happening in this kind of new world of the, I hate to think of what the America is going to do to our world trade, but just assume that our single source of export was actually brought to a halt. Would cannabis, or better said, would hemp, industrial hemp, be of use?
I mean, we've just been hearing just before we started recording about some potential applications for it. I mean,
Yeah.
good for the body, mind, and spirit, and for building houses potentially.
Well,
The answer to the housing crisis, do you think?
Oh, yes. Well, the answer to the housing crisis is get rid of the idiots who are causing the crisis. That's one answer. But building homes which are affordable, not just to build, but also to use, would be a very sensible thing to do, especially if they can be built quickly. And that is hemp. Because with the industrial hemp, you're getting here natural carbon capture, natural carbon absorption for the first 3 years of the build at least. You could use that to make industrial wood out of hemp. But the building itself, either with hemp walls or indeed there's now a modular approach where a teenager can click together, like Lego, can click together the walls of a house, complete in 8 days. You can now fill that with hemp, which would then require no heating, no cooling, because it helps to modulate the temperature within the living house.
It's beginning to sound like if the Legalise Cannabis Party does itself out of a job, maybe there's a role for a evolving normalised cannabis party or something. Do you think that the job is done once cannabis is more widely accessible, or is it then about kind of opening the eyes of West Australians to all the possible opportunities and uses?
How many hours do you have?
One.
Okay.
Let's call it one.
Well, look. People say to me, you've got this cannabis is a single issue party. And I say, have you not read what I've done over the last 4 years in Parliament? So what have you done? Well, how about the Firearms Act, the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage? What about actually the environment when they defanged the EPA yet again with actually failing to actually address the needs of the environment in favour of the industrialists? Have you ever thought about what we do with that? What about our policies putting out there for education? How about the reforming the tax system? All these things are things which we stand for. So why cannabis? Well, what do you think that single cannabis leaf represents as a symbol to you?
I mean, the multiplicity of, I don't know what the word is. What do you call sub-leaves, tendrils or fronds to the single plant suggests there's kind of a multiplicity, a diversity of issues with a common thread binding them together.
Absolutely. But it also, to me, represents, as a symbol, it represents the way that government has lied to us continuously over the decades and the thousands of years.
Right.
Because if they're going to lie to us about something which is as innocuous as cannabis, where else are they going to be telling lies? Who wants to start?
Is the current government doing that in relation to how they're responding to your party and your platform specifically? Have you experienced that in this Parliament?
The bottom line is no, they're not responding. In fact, every response has been, we have no intention of legalising cannabis. Fine. Behind the scenes, when I'm speaking with my Labour colleagues, and they are colleagues, almost every one of them is supportive of what I say. So why aren't you doing it? Well, and it's in your state party policy platform, is it not? Yes, but. And the reason is, but the senior management has taken a calculated move on this not to recommend legalising or at least decriminalising cannabis because they might be seen to be soft on drugs and therefore they might lose votes.
So I'm interested in kind of picking up on that last bit there, soft on drugs, because I'm wondering, is cannabis the extent of it, or would you be in favour of drug legalisation more broadly?
Well, we can look at that broadly in just a moment, but can you tell me what you think is the main reason for people actually using drugs?
I mean, because it's fun, largely.
When you look at it, you find that that's true. I mean, the teenaging years when they go out there and dancing, whatever. But actually, most people are using drugs because they're suffering some form of trauma.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah.
And so that you could then be saying, as indeed the police did in Portugal when they decriminalised all drugs, even the nasty ones, they found that suicide rates went down. Alcoholism went down, crime went down, GDP of the nation went up. But importantly, the police changed from criminalising to medicalising. Hey, bro, you got a problem? Let's get you sorted. Rather than you've been taking illicit drugs, you're nicked.
Yeah.
Having said which, I mean, at the moment, there's plenty of people wandering around the streets of Perth who appear to be under the influence of all manner of different drugs, and the police don't seem to be immediately throwing them in the cells simply for, if they're self-medicating with methamphetamine or heroin or whatever. I mean, is there not already a fairly common sense approach the authorities are displaying in WA? How do you think we rate compared to places like Portugal or states in the United States, for example?
I haven't got a score for you, but we do rate miserably.
Right.
For example, here, if you are deemed, because you've grown 6 plants for yourself, knowing that probably half of them are going to die, but supposing the police come in when they've grown, say, about 2 or 3 fingers in length, you're now deemed to be a drug trafficker. As a drug trafficker, the magistrate's got no recourse but to treat you as a trafficker, which means also that they can now confiscate your home where you had these 6 little saplings, little plants, because you are now deemed to be a drug trafficker. And that means that the proceeds of crime mean that your property can be confiscated. And this has happened.
Right. Speaking of other drugs, just quickly, you described the government MPs as colleagues. One of your potential colleagues, I think, currently placed 23rd on the Labor Senate ticket, so maybe not in this next parliament, but was recently quoted from some social media posts from a few years ago as saying words to the effect of, a life without experiencing LSD is not worth living, and take drugs, not advice. Do you share those sort of views? Is your approach to recreational or therapeutic drug use as Catholic as to kind of encompass LSD, for example, mushrooms? Because you come to the right place, if they are.
Right, well, I haven't got any for sale, if that's what you're asking.
Well, maybe I was offering.
That's a wonderful question indeed. But the first thing I'd point out, don't let me run away from this point, please, because I'm a politician. But the first thing I would say is that what people's past indiscretions were is actually nobody's business. 15 years ago, when you're still learning how the world works, you made a silly mistake. You're going to hold that against someone forever? I mean, that's the black side of politics, where you try and find something to pin on someone else and then make them unelectable.
Yeah, I did think culturally we were kind of past holding tweets from like 2012 against people.
I think maybe when there's literally nothing else going on in the election, you're kind of reduced to digging into social media posts from the early 2010s, maybe.
Yeah.
But they've got teams going around searching. But when I became a politician, I was told to search your post to see if anything actionable is found. I didn't tell them I'm not going to remove my naked pictures.
Right. How far back do you have to go to find those? Asking for a friend.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
I mean, lots of inquiries when they heard you were coming
Not
on the pod.
too long ago, actually,
Yeah,
because
we need a cover image for the podcast.
Yes.
So, yeah.
well, an uncovered image, I'd imagine. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
We could talk about that in private, perhaps later. But don't pick on people's small mistakes they've made. I mean, it's ridiculous. As if we don't change our opinions over the years. Of course we do.
Yeah.
And we can have very different opinions because we've now lived life better. But the question here about the going free on all the drugs. Look, someone asked me the other day if I take cannabis. And I said, well, no, not usually. And why not? Well, I don't need it. When I come back from work, I may have had a hard day's work. I'm not stressed. I'm actually I'll sit back and read a book.
You do seem like a remarkably relaxed guy. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I was held hostage by a man with a knife. He held it at my neck and said, when I kill you. And for half an hour, it was like that. The police force was behind in riot shields and batons, and they couldn't come in because in that second, I would have been killed. So eventually, I managed to convince the young man, this wasn't a good idea, and he gave me the knife, and we walked out. And then when I came back to the ward, psychiatric ward, the nurses were looking around as, has he suffered some kind of trauma? So when my PTSD patients come to me, not all, but some of them that I think need to hear this, and they describe their trauma, I'll say, this is what happened to me. And then I say, now I wonder, as they're looking at me thinking I've got PTSD, I said, I wonder, why do you think I don't have PTSD? And it's really about how your mind constructs an internal representation which allows you to see things differently. For example, if that little bag there might hold an IED, the last one did and ripped my friend apart, I'm not going to want to go near it. But if I've never seen an IED go off, I'll see a plastic bag and I say, ooh, must tidy it away. It's the way you see the events in the world that your brain processes that we've got to deal with. And going back to the way drugs are used, a lot of people have got a very hard life, and they're using other drugs, not just cannabis, to get a different feeling on life and to feel that they can actually just exist without feeling really, really, really bad?
Yeah, I mean, I'm even familiar. I've done a fair bit of research and reporting on this issue myself in the past. Familiar with drug trials in the United States using cannabis to specifically address PTSD, including, I think, sort of PTSD from war zone combat, using a mixed model of direct ingestion, but also sort of talk therapy alongside it in that altered or relaxed state. Is that the kind of approach that you would sort of advocate for, and have you seen examples of that suggested for Western Australia?
Oh yes, I advocated for it. When Mind Medicine Australia got in contact with me, I was very happy to support that, and I did. I approached the TGA and made a very strong case that we should make at least psilocybin and MDMA available for this treatment.
And hey presto, must have been a pretty persuasive letter, because look at us now.
I was angry because my one of my sons had killed himself just shortly before, and I was really angry at the whole idea that we can't have access to these life-saving drugs. So I sent a very strong letter to John Skerritt at the TGA at the time and said, listen, for every single suicide from now on, we'll place a white cross at your front door.
Right.
Because a lot of the people who are killing themselves are doing it not because they're drunk or whatever. They're having a hard time. A lot of it is trauma. A lot of it is PTSD that we simply don't allow ourselves to diagnose. We're letting people just simmer away and deteriorate gradually, and are passing off things like diazepam, Valiums to calm people, or antipsychotics to help them sleep, and not dealing with the fundamental underlying problem, which is psychosocial disorder and the injustice that has been foisted upon us.
It's quite a holistic approach to diagnosing.
And I'd go further and say, listen, if you want to have fun by taking, say, my favourite drug is actually DMT, and it changes your perspective, and that's really, really good. The trouble is going to be, it's like having a glass of whiskey. It's great. I can recommend some good whiskies, but a whole bottle in one go, not a good idea. It's exactly the same principle as psychedelics.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I find really interesting about the whole psychedelics conversation is the kind of medicalisation of psychedelics, the way that it's always talked about well, not always, but often talked about in medical terms, especially when we're talking about legalising and regulating. But, I mean, to me, the primary benefits of those are probably more spiritual rather than medical. And so I'm curious, do you see psychedelics or cannabis through a spiritual lens, and is the medical lens just kind of a way in, or how does that all kind of figure in your thinking?
I need to speak with you guys for a lot longer. Okay. There are several layers I would put to you regarding the use of any mind-altering substance. The first was purely three-dimensional. Here we are, I've had a hard day, I'll need a whiskey to just take my mind off it, or a glass of sherry to help me sleep, or indeed some people will take a six-pack or even 12 pints of beer, because they're dealing with it as they feel best, and some of it can be really unhealthy. That's a 3D response to it. But then we get the question of what's it all about, which now comes into the question about the who are we, why are we? And then comes the understanding that none of what we see as existence is actually existing. It's all a three-dimensional illusion based on what could be a four-dimensional energetic expression. So we're all distortions of the space-time continuum. You could then take that even further and say, well, okay, fine. But if time no longer plays a role in that dimension, then the wavelength, the things going at the speed of light aren't actually moving at all. So we're having to think beyond that. And now comes the question of, okay, so what is this existence? Because the Big Bang doesn't explain it. Who are we? Why are we? And then we get into a whole deep area of thinking. Now, I challenge you to think, if you've been doing a ledger of say, accounting, to then think about these spiritual things, you cannot. But if you were to say, let's have a nice evening with friends and take some psilocybin, would you then be in a better frame of mind to let your mind discover things?
I mean, that's a very, very good question. Sounds like the kind of thing that might raise the odd eyebrow in the emergency ward, let alone in the upper house of WA Parliament. Are there many of your colleagues politically who you think share your open-minded perspective on some of this stuff?
Not many, but not many of them have held the hand of a dying person in a car crash. So I would put it to them that if you haven't got the experience, shut up.
I can't imagine too many Labor MPs in the WA Parliament asking themselves questions about who we are and what we are and where the Big Bang came from. It seems to be kind of a different frame to most of the political discourse that I hear.
Oh, of course. And if you listen to my political discourse, it's entirely along those lines of the classical politician giving a speech in Parliament, or indeed in public. Because, to be honest, I mean, if you're not in the frame of mind to listen to different ideas, you're in the wrong place. You shouldn't be speaking like that. So you need to adapt what you're saying to the ability of the people to comprehend. I'm not being criticizing. I'm saying if someone is suffering acute financial stress, mortgages are unpayable, they can't put food on the table, if I'm going to give an economic explanation of what we as a party intend to do, I'm not going to be talking about the realms of Friedman or Keynes or indeed Marx. I'll be wondering how I can help this person access quality food for a fraction of the price, maybe using food bank. That's the kind of into the nitty-gritty we want to get for helping people survive.
Yeah.
When I'm talking in Parliament, I'll be saying, listen, why are we following this neoliberal program making the rich richer and the poor poorer? Explain it to me like I'm a baby.
And what about when you're in a hospital, in a sort of, potentially earlier in your career? Was it similarly necessary to kind of to code switch, so to speak, to shift from conceiving of things in a more spiritual, holistic sense to comply with the requirements of medical science and kind of the discourse that's expected of you in a clinical setting?
I think the request of a doctor in any setting is to actually give the patient enough information and support to do what's necessary. Whether it's I'm going to actually open you up to replace your cardiac the valves, or I'm listening to you having a hard time with your partner. So it's quite a difficult question, actually. If I'm speaking to someone who's come to me with, say, I'm dying of cancer, and I've got to say, well, yes. Okay, How do I say that? For some people, I say, well, let's look at the tests haven't been completed with that and that to do. We'll give this to specialists, to holding things at bay until we come to the final conclusion, this is what we're doing. Other people, I might say something like, that's interesting, apart from the fact that we're all going to die, tell me, what makes you think we're alive? Now, I can't say that to everyone who comes in because it simply doesn't come across. But if someone's prepared to listen, and by listening, I'm able to assess how they react, then we can get different levels of education. If it's about here, we'll get this cancer looked at by the specialist, fine. And this program here, fine. This medication, fine. For someone else, maybe saying, well, we'll do that medication thing with the chemotherapy or the surgery by all means. But tell me what you mean about how the immune system can be enhanced with the thoughts. And then we're having a different approach to managing wellness.
And you're using an intuitive approach there to work out who's receptive to what kind of message or what kind of thinking?
I think you have to. I have a problem with seeing a lot of my colleagues who are very much in here, that's a diagnosis, tick box here, here's a script, get out, next patient please. And then they're telling people how much they've earned to afford their Mercedes or whatever. That isn't medicine. That is not the healing art at all.
Yeah.
Others are there not because they can earn fantastic amounts of money. And word to the wise, by the way, young people, if you think you want to earn money, don't become a doctor. But if you're there because you've got a passion for helping people heal, when I was 13, I knew I wanted to be a healer. And that's everything has been on that direction. It's only a few years ago I realized I can't be an effective healer because the psychosocial situation prevents it. Therefore, sitting in my room one-on-one is not sufficient. I must do something different.
And that's what brought you to Parliament.
Indeed.
Right.
Anger, pure anger.
Yeah. So talking of prescriptions, in 2023, you got in a bit of hot water for prescribing Dexies to a patient because you're a GP. It's meant to be prescribed by a psychiatrist. I know now that part of the Labor platform that they're bringing to this election is that they're going to allow GPs to prescribe ADHD medication. So you must presumably be fairly happy with that outcome?
Well, I suppose so. But what I'm also saying is why did it take so long for them to follow every other country in the world? It's the only country I've been in where that has been banned to me.
Right. I mean, I've got to say that the ADHD meds one is an interesting one to me because I used to be a high school teacher, and my distinct impression from that time, I mean, I'm not a medical professional, but my distinct impression from that time was that those medications were perhaps overprescribed. And I know there was a study done in Western Australia which showed that if you were a school student in one of the youngest students in your year group, you were twice as likely to be on ADHD meds as one of the oldest students in that year group, which suggests that there's some overprescribing going on. So It's always been one that I've found a little bit troubling, I must say.
I'd quite agree, but how many hours do you have? Because that's a huge... it really is a topic that's worth of its own time. Look, we've got increasing numbers of ADHD, and my particular question is this associated with any change in our behaviour in the past? And I have to say that where I am concerned, and that I'm asking questions, I haven't got the answers, could this be one part of the increasing load that children's immune systems has to bear with their multiple vaccinations at a very early age? I don't know. But I tell you what, when I question that, when I ask that question, I run the risk of losing my license.
Well, that's a controversial statement, really, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a question.
Yeah.
And I think Galileo Galilei, when he postulated that the sun didn't go around us, was making a controversial statement, worthy of being executed. And I think we shouldn't shy away from a controversial statement. What we shouldn't do is jump again and again and again and again on something which is plainly not making sense or not resonating with the people. You bring the evidence again and again. And finally, if it's true, people will begin to believe. And we need to have the courage of standing up and actually doing what we think is right and proper. And that's not encouraged now. We're being taught to comply, and that is a way into fascism, I think.
And is that an argument you've been able to prosecute through Parliament, specifically around the issue of vaccines and the potential impacts that may or may not be having on children? Are there mechanisms available as a parliamentarian to investigate, to get more information?
It's an interesting question because it's not a question that we should ask the parliamentarians. It's the one we should ask the medical authorities, and they have closed ranks and not allowed that to happen. And I think that's a mistake. We really ought to be looking at the... one of the problems is that just because we see a relation between one object and another object doesn't mean there's actually a causality there. So the rise in the ADHD autism cases may not be associated with the rise in vaccinations. But it's a question I think needs to be elucidated.
So you're not saying there's evidence for that, but you're just saying...
There's none. I'm seeing a
an
pattern.
open question.
I'm seeing a pattern, and I don't know about it.
I mean, is that not a pattern that was first tested in sort of medical science almost 30 years ago, though? There was the Baron-Cohen study, which kind of, suggested a link between the MMS vaccine in the UK and autism cases rising. That was subsequently retracted, obviously, by Lancet. Is this not a question that has been litigated through medical science over recent generations?
Now, you've seen the question here litigated. Questions have been... Look, does anyone litigate the idea that prescribing cholesterol medications is stupid and wrong? It is.
Right.
So the rise in cholesterol is actually a problem caused by the American government forcing grain farmers to increase and giving the excess grain into the forms of multiple sugars, which then made our population obese.
Yeah.
But look, it's evident that, but it took a long time for that to become.
But just specifically on that issue of vaccines, for example, you say that it's not a question for politicians to necessarily kind of concern themselves with so much as it is doctors, and obviously you bridge that, you have a foot in either camp and maintain both as part of your practice. But if medical science has been grappling with this for decades already, and many people, I think, would suggest it has been settled to some extent, is there not a case? I guess I'm asking, can you launch an inquiry in Parliament into some of these issues if you're re-elected, and is that something you would feel is an appropriate use of your powers as a parliamentarian?
Well, I could do that, but I'm not going to do that because it hasn't hit the level of the consciousness of the people themselves. Certain groups would be saying, yep, I'm full on with that, but we haven't really got the pressure. Like, for example, the gay marriage was actually the people made a decision. And so I think that would be me shoveling shit uphill because it really wouldn't do any good right now, maybe later. But I can flag the question and we can look at that and just have an open mind because we do have an avalanche of neurodevelopmental disorders. Yes, it may have increased the ability to think creatively, that we can do, but it's caused a lot of problems too. So I think we ought to be aware that our actions do have reactions, much like bringing in the cane toad to control, the vermin in Queensland, and now we've got a problem. Same for the foxes and the rabbits. They weren't a natural part of Australia, but we've now become a problem. And it took a while for people to realise that, and medical minds take a long time to change.
So just to be very blunt, are you kind of drawing a comparison or analogy between invasive pests in the physical space and vaccines in the human immune system? Is that?
I wouldn't go as far as that. One of my major concerns, my major fears for the future is actually quite the opposite. I'm fearing the resurgence of infectious diseases killing people by the millions.
We've just seen measles popping up in the US in recent weeks, right?
Well, measles is, again, another example. When it came out, I was opposed to the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. Because first of all, I agreed with the contention that they may be associated with autism. And I've got personal experience of 2 of my patients brought in their children who went into the vaccination healthy and came out with autism. And just another one I just met the other week there, whose now 28-year-old son was fine until the vaccine. And then suddenly he was developing well, language, movement. After the vaccine, suddenly he was autistic. Is there a correlation? Well, Andrew Wakefield has paid the price for asking that question. Mind you, he did fudge some figures. But if you look at the actual publications, they will recognize that most of the papers published are not actually accurate.
So some of these views and statements, I imagine, amongst your kind of medical colleagues would get you shouted down in certain rooms, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that. What's your relationship, I suppose, with the medical establishment?
Don't really have one. Once they realised that I'm actually leader of the Legalise Cannabis Party, there was all conversation stopped because cannabis is a dangerous drug which kills people.
Right.
Which, of course, is complete nonsense and reflects an ignorance which is beyond belief. Also, I've begun to move out of the medical circles because I can see people working with what they know in an inefficient manner because that's all that they're given to them. If we were to work at doing what we should do of helping people to recover wellness, what's the first thing we would do? We'd actually abolish the food processing industry.
So you've been sanctioned, right? Have you ever worried about losing your practicing license? Is that something that you think about?
It worries me, but there's a lot of other doctors who've lost their licenses for speaking out for truth, and I'd be proud to be in that group. But as I have a voice, look, the ADHD thing, when they came along and said, they said the usual thing, the APRA, they actually operate in the darkness. They tell people, you will not mention this to anyone. So there you are, with a possible loss of a license or a sanction of some sort. You can't even speak to your best friends about it, let alone a lawyer. Lawyers aren't allowed. They've got lawyers, but the doctor doesn't. And of course, you're guilty until proved otherwise. Okay? So they sent me a letter, and there's the typical legalistic letter with lots of things. You've flouted this and done that and done that. And I wrote back and said, well, basically I gave I like to say it, I told them to fuck off. What I said, this is completely wrong, that is completely wrong, this third point here is correct, but I documented that in my medical records that I'm not allowed to prescribe dexamphetamine for this patient who wanted to see me for cannabis. But I know that if the psychiatrist sees, you're on cannabis medical, even as medical, we're going to ban you from all future dexamphetamine prescriptions. Doesn't make any sense. Anyhow, so there I was, and I said, so that I've documented. And then secondly, you want me to get training. Now, I've made the right diagnosis, and they confirmed that. I made the right treatment, and they've confirmed that. But what you're saying, you want me to be better qualified to make the right diagnosis and give the right treatment. Well, actually, I went through with that, and I'm now upgraded to the skill of a psychiatric consultant in ADHD, which allows me to say with some great confidence that a lot of what passes for psychiatric care for ADHD is simply the prescribing of stimulant therapy and ignoring the other areas which need to be addressed. They're causing harm.
I'd agree with that.
A properly trained GP who cares about the patient wellness would look at this very differently.
So a lot of what I'm hearing here is reminding me a little bit of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is the current health secretary under Trump in the United States. What do you reckon? Are you an RFK fan?
No, I'm not. I mean, his reaction to the measles outbreak is typical of that. He'll backtrack on that. So no, the man is uneducated, basically. Now, he's
processed food was something you were talking about there. The vaccine issue there. There do seem to be some kind of parallels.
We've been talking about this for 50 years. Okay, it's nothing new. This is something you can pick up in the bookstore in Dummix. You don't have to be a groundbreaking thinker to realize this. Living according to nature is probably a good thing to do, just not the wrong kind of nature. Playing with snakes is maybe not the best idea.
Just to go off the question about ADHD and autism and its possible causes. I mean, we've spoken about vaccines, obviously. What about? I mean, we've got 3 of these smartphones pointing at us as we speak. Do you not think the fact that more kids these days may be less socially inclined or competent, or perhaps don't have quite the attention span of previous generations, might not have something to do with the fact that they're spending almost all their waking hours mediating their life through screens?
I quite agree, and it's dangerous. There's so many things that are wrong with that, but how are we going to fix it? I mean, my own children have been through this. It's like you're born with a phone welded on. And it's really quite a dangerous thing. But also the adults too, it's taking us away from actually being who we are, which is a communal being. And part of that life is gone.
I mean, people would say that the Twitter, that Facebook, that Instagram, they provide, social network, social connection, social stimulation. You don't think that quite rates compared to sitting around the fire?
Look, the concept of putting... there's a lovely cartoon there about this man. It says his wife calls him to bed. Just a moment, honey. There's someone... I'm just correcting some idiot on the internet. I mean, this... I mean, goodness sakes. Just because you can comment doesn't mean that you should comment. I mean, if I look at... I don't go there anymore, but on Twitter... what is now called X, is a final example of how you can misuse communication. Communication should be about understanding what the other said and also making yourself understood to find agreement, understanding of what's going on. And the communication there is actually hurtful, vile.
Yeah, well, it's definitely cooked my attention span, that's for sure. I used to do things like read poetry, and now I...
Yeah, but you're triple vaxxed, aren't you?
Yeah, well, who knows? It's hard to unpack, right? Well, there's various strands of causation in our kind of complex modern world. But I want to move forward a little bit now. Let's talk a little bit about what your term in Parliament has been like, because the Parliament obviously has been dominated by Labor. They've had large majorities in both houses. How's that been for you to be in there alongside them?
Initially intimidating. You walk into this place, it's entirely foreign, you're new, you're unsupported, you haven't got the party backing like Labour and Liberal do, and you've got to find your own way. It's daunting. To find that 2 weeks after you start, you've just had your inaugural speech, so you can now just speak. Now I've got to present my first bill. Okay. How do you do that? And the forms and the way of speaking and the presenting, it's all very challenging. So it's a growing episode, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy returning to Parliament. Someone once said to me, it's like you're taking like a duck to water, and I do believe I have. This is where I'm supposed to be. When I sit in my medical practice, I realise I'm good at this, but this is not where I'm supposed to be. In Parliament, I'm supposed to be there, standing up for the people and working on the larger scale.
I have wondered how you've managed to maintain both. Is that the fact that you're still practicing doctor 2 days a week? Is that?
Well, if on Saturday I lose my seat, I've really got to work, and I can't work if I haven't got a license. So sure, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's just a retirement plan, a safety net, so to speak.
Well, but it also interesting that the thing about this is when I get up to speak about what's happening to patients, when I'm speaking about the medical situation, I'm actually talking from the sharp end. So you dare criticize me? You come and do my job, okay? Or shut up.
Yeah.
So are there frustrations in seeing just the absolute dominance that Labor has and, the ability with which they can kind of move things through and do what they like?
Depends how you frame that. On the one hand, you want to do things and they're blocking you and they're calling it democratic. Yes, it would make you angry. On the other hand, I see what happens when you allow an autocratic dictatorship to emerge from such a large party. Look at the policies and the standing orders in place, and you realize there is so much that we can and should do to enhance democracy in our state. And so rather than looking at the negative side, I'm saying there's much we should do and can do, and I'm there to do it.
Right. Yeah. So what then do you think have been your major achievements sitting in the Parliament during this term?
Well, the first thing I would notice is that what I did not realize before is that truth matters nothing in politics, absolutely nothing. It's all about the perception of truth. And with that perception of truth comes the narrative. Controlling the narrative, you control the perception, therefore you control that false truth. Or call it lies, if you will. Now, coming into Parliament, my biggest success is that we have mentioned cannabis, we've questioned 240 times. It's about 1,800 references to cannabis. We've normalised mentioning cannabis. And that's part of the task, is to take the sense of cannabis as something vile out of the public mind. We've been brainwashed for far too long. The next thing I'm really pleased about is that I've been able to make friends on all sides of Parliament. And that has been a great blessing. I've found some great people there, and to speak with them.
Who are some of your friends inside? Can you tell us?
The friends, well, basically, there's only a few who are not friends, and I'm not going to mention them.
Sure.
But there are some politicians with whom the Labour side, for example, I very much like Dan Caddy, who's position 15 in this cycle.
No, Dan.
Lovely, very erudite man. I like very much Pierre Yang. I'm particular friends with Matt Swinburne, the parliamentary secretary. He may not want me to say that because I'll bring him into some discredit, but I very much appreciate his support and his counselling and his skills. On the Liberal side, I've always got along well with Jorn Sibma, and of course Stephen Thomas is a wonderful person to listen to. And the same is true in the crossbench. I very much like Brad Pettit of the Greens, a personal friend of mine. And I'd have to think hard to find any politician that I'm not able to call either a friend or someone who's neutral. There's a few there who...
What about McGowan? Friend, foe, or somewhere in between?
It's like they're looking at America and China. Are they friends or enemies? No, they're neither. They are.
Implacable.
McGowan is. He is a very skillful politician, which doesn't mean I like him. It means I recognise his skill.
Sounds like you're talking to him right now.
Yeah, and if I was to speak to him, I'd say I wish you had the common courtesy to tell us that when you were speaking so passionately, you were actually lying to your back teeth. This is a man who in 2003 spoke passionately about legalizing cannabis, but personally is detested by it and has done what he can to prevent it being legalized.
Do you think does he strike you as the kind of guy who indulges when he's
not in cannabis? Not in cannabis. Plenty of alcohol, I'm sure, and he's not. He may not be the most how can I put this, upright of politicians. But then which of us is?
Physically or morally? Or a bit of both?
I beg your pardon?
Well, I mean, was he stumbling over his words? He always seemed to have a very, very clean line read to me when he was standing up at press conferences.
Well, you have to bear in mind, he was wonderful at organising people, wonderful at speaking. He's got a great way of speaking, and I have to admire him for that. I'm not so very happy with the fact that the Labour Party policy can be ignored, but look, that's a matter for the Labour Party members.
Yeah.
And what about his successor, Roger Cook? Are you on friendly terms with Roger?
Yeah, I think so. Not in the sense of that we'll go out for a beer together, but we will recognise each other and say nice words to each other. But then again, he's a gentleman. So is Mark McGowan, for that matter.
So there were two Legalise Cannabis representatives elected to the upper house, you and Sophia Mormond. She resigned last year. How did you feel when that happened? How was that experience for you?
Well, to be honest, it was a long time coming. But the alignment with the cannabis as being the primary purpose was always there. Sophia is actually a very capable woman. I've learned from her and I appreciate her presence. But there was no resonance there. And I think she was particularly taken aback by the position she was given and decided to go her own way, basically standing up for people in the Southwest, which is a passion she has developed.
So the position on the ticket, I think she was given the 5th position. Can you tell us why that was?
Well, I could, but I won't.
You won't. Okay. Can I ask, how much did the rift have to do with gender issues? Because that's one of the things she's spoken quite a lot about since she's left the parliament, is transgender issues.
Well, she spoke about that throughout her parliamentary term, whether in private or in public. It was always a major feature. I spent 3 hours in the car with her listening to nothing else but. So this was a passion of hers. And I can have an understanding of why it has been a passion. I can appreciate the need. But it's not my passion. My passion is actually wellness, physical, mental, social, and financial wellness, and social justice.
I mean, it's an interesting one because gender medicine is a topic that you often hear people say should be depoliticised and should be left to medical professionals. And, you know, here you are, you're a medical professional. So do you have particular views one way or another on those kind of issues of gender medicine?
I do, actually. I think the right of a doctor to express a moral conviction and imply it the patient must follow is abhorrent to me. The concept of a doctor saying you can't have the contraceptive pill, you're 14 and you're unmarried. No, get out of here. You don't deserve to be a doctor. So people's feelings, people's attitudes, people's moods are none of my business. My job is to give them the best advice they can to live their lives the way they want so that they can achieve as much as possible of their desires. as long as they're legal desires. I think the horrible ones I'm not going to help them with. When it comes to transgender medicine, first of all, my niece used to be my nephew, and I know very well the bitter struggle that she went through to actually recognize and make that change, and it still is not easy. So anyone who says this is just a way to get into the girls' changing room is actually not understanding the problem. I also feel that there are people there with very loud voices who make them obnoxiously loud, and it doesn't do their cause any good. So the assumptions they make and the way they put that about doesn't help in getting understanding across the party lines. The Labour point of view that sex is actually a social construct is complete stupidity. We have X genes, we have Y genes, and we've got very few occasional issues where there's not quite the XXXY change. But that's a biological side. The sociological side, the genders that we have, the feelings of attraction, is none of my business or anyone else's business. As long as you're doing what you want to do and harming no one else, that should be it. I'm not going to judge you for anything you do. Well, there's a few things, but the sexuality is not my business.
So that's probably, I mean, not that I'm very closely aware of Sophia's position, but it seems like a different position to hers.
Well, Sophia and we've had long talks about this, and we can generally come to the understanding that most of what she says I agree with. There's fine points I don't agree with, but that's true, I think, of anyone.
Just about any issue with anyone, yeah.
Yeah, and the transgender thing, I mean, it's the same thing. It's not just the transgender. You notice how when it comes to election that people look to see who's been screwing who out of marriage, and all of a sudden, immorality. And you're thinking, guys, your sexual life is no one else's business as long as no one else gets hurt. And I remember very well when I was a medical student, I was preparing for the finals, had the mock finals, and we had this woman, he was rhesus negative, and do we give her anti-D? Which is you get rhesus sickness if you're negative and someone's got positive blood, then the fetus, the second and the third, are at risk of dying. So you give anti-D. So I said the simple question, well, why don't we just see what the husband's blood group is? If there's a negative, then there's no chance of being positive. And the consultant said to me, do you know, in this part of the world, 20% of babies do not come from the biological father.
Right. Well, there you go.
So make a big hue and a cry in the newspaper. It's in your interest to know what the politicians are doing. No, it's not.
Is anyone actually saying that these days, though? I haven't can't think of it. I mean, this election has seemed pretty short on scandal full stop, really. They're digging into sort of old, social media posts for anything they can find as a result, as we discussed. But sex scandals certainly don't seem to have registered at all.
Brittany Higgins?
Sure. Yeah, okay. I mean, I suppose...
That's vile. And the way people have treated her is abominable. And we still vote for them, for goodness sakes. I mean, have some morality.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, certainly. I mean, I suppose more in the sort of local political context. I'm sure there's all sorts of, antics going on behind the scenes, but none of them really seem to make it through.
And alcohol consumption and things which, you found running naked through Scarborough, not that I was, but this... And... What's the problem? Tell me how you wish to address the problems that are facing the people, not who you had sex with, or what you do in your free time. Or if you like playing mahjong and others like playing bridge and you're going to have a fight with them. Come on, guys. Live a life.
Yeah.
Well, look at the Chinese warships coming by. And they're live firing. What have we done in Taiwan and the South China Sea? It's exactly the same. Does anyone kick up a fuss about that?
Yeah.
So you let's just talk orcas for a second then, I suppose.
If you must.
I mean, we can probably pretty much see through this window. If we could see far enough. Maybe you can, Dr. Walker, with your long-range eyesight. I mean, you back the Chinese in to take what steps they need to kind of to enforce their rights. Do you think it's all fair game? Drive-bys on Garden Island?
Well, and so no drive-bys on Zhuhai, for example.
I don't even know where that is. I beg your pardon.
Okay, look.
Which landmass are we talking about with that?
It's mainland China. Zhuhai is actually near Macau. And,
right, very good. Okay. Sounds busy.
It is actually, yes.
Yeah.
But the thing about this is that what the Chinese have done has been done by every navy since before the Phoenician time.
Yeah.
Okay, it's what people do. It's international waters. It's a chance for us to spy on what they're doing. They're having a look at us, of course. And the problem is...
Do you think it's timed for the WA state election? Do you think the whole thing was cooked up in a ante-room in the Politburo in Beijing 3 years ago, and they were kind of drawing big circle around March 8th, 2025 on the map and making sure the coordinates were matching up?
Oh, I do hope so.
It's good, it's good timing.
It would show some measure of interest in what we're doing in Australia.
Yeah, a US nuclear sub, 10 Ks from where we're sitting now. Collins destroyers on their way out. I mean, it's all kind of all lining up nicely.
Well, I've got a son of mine who's just signed up. He's actually doing his basic training with the Royal Australian Navy just now, so he'll be involved in that.
Oh, wow.
And so, yes, I've got a personal interest. What I'm saying is that we as a nation, as Australians, not just West Australians, as Australians, we need to stand sovereign. We do not need to be subservient vassal states of the US. Especially for a failing empire, which is going to actually put us into a great deal of conflict and then stand back as we carry the losses.
So that sounds like a pretty implicit rejection of AUKUS, the tenets underpinning it at least. Does Legalise Cannabis have a position?
They don't have a position. This is just me as a father and as a fairly old man now. What I'm thinking is that my father taught this when he was flying fighter planes in Burma in the war. Don't trust the Americans. They don't know who they're shooting at. And it's the same then as it was the same now. The US has got only one concern just now, and that is US interests. They don't care about us at all, except as how they can use us. The Chinese don't have a single issue with us. What they want to do is put Chinese interests first. Which of these two countries is wrong? Okay, so now we can assume that America is not our enemy, it's not our friend, it simply is. China is not our enemy, it's not our friend, it simply is. We must learn to live with them. And what we need to do as Australians is put Australia first. We need to stand up for our people, our homes, our livelihood, our agriculture, our economy, our environment.
So you've just referred, I think, to the US as I think you said, a dying empire or a fading empire?
Failing empire, yes.
Failing empire. Do you think that J.D. Vance is a knob?
He is more than a knob, he's an ultimate knob. I support Roger Cook in that entirely.
Very clear.
Right, there we go.
Draw a line under that one.
No minced words there.
No, I could say much worse. I mean, I can describe Trump, but no, we're not having this.
Let's get into a diplomatic incident. Come on, we've got the warships just off the coast, now or never.
Oh, look, he'll make a big enough hole for him to be shot into. I mean, look, my concern with the Americans is that they lead in opinions in certain parts of the world. Let's talk Dutton, for example, and for the love of all that is holy, please don't put a vote for him. Because that system there is what's making the rich richer and the poor poorer, and he'll justify that with weasel words till the cows come home. Don't believe a word of it.
And just like Trump, he would pretend that he's against that while secretly enabling it. Yeah.
Oh, look, I mean, Trump is look, I like Trump, you were surprised, he's a disruptor, and we need a disruptor, but we need a disruptor with morals and ethics. He knows nothing of that. But the system he's trying to break down, he's trying to break it down so the oligarchs can get more money, and the poor are going to get poorer, and those who are not necessary to work in the factories are going to die of hunger or whatever. I don't know.
The neo-gilded age.
Indeed, yeah. I see that happening very much. That's what the Project 25 is all about, making the rich richer, and we're going to be the subservient vassals. Okay. But if we were to do that with more pure views of how can we serve the people, how can we serve this planet, how can we ensure that our planet thrives, that the climate, while it's changing, it certainly will change, it has changed over the millennia, that we need to actually change in parallel with it to adapt and survive. We need to encourage that we care for our home. We need to encourage how we care for each other, which means we're not going to beat each other up or attack each other. We're going to actually live in harmony and peace. Love being the key word. Look, John Lennon and the Beatles, George Harrison, that music there basically exemplifies what we as a people need to do. No war, more love.
Very good.
So let's bring things back a little bit closer to home for a little bit.
If you must.
What do you make of the electoral reforms that are coming into place for the first time this election for the upper house where you sit?
Well, no one knows what the outcome is going to be because the system is untried in our state at least. So we're in the dark and we're all nervous and biting our nails. What upsets me is the fact that there was no plans to introduce legislation change until just after the election when they introduced legislation change. It's like there were no plans to move the hospital from into Fiona Stanley area, the King Eddie's. And 2 weeks, suddenly the whole thing was changed. There were no plans.
Yeah.
Well, look, someone somewhere is benefiting, but it's not us, the people. It's not the unborn babies who are going to be at risk when they're there. Where were we for that? Politics.
Electoral reforms.
The reforms. The reforms were actually brought up because McGowan basically wanted to hammer the Nats. And he also wants to make sure that independents have less of a chance of getting elected. So the idea, and it's a great idea, one person, one vote, yes, I'm for that. But it's going to actually mean that other people are not going to be represented.
Such as who?
The people in the regions. There are not enough voices there.
Yeah.
So how many seats are you expecting to pick up? I think it's, 2.8% per seat?
2.68%, close.
Right, yeah.
Not that I've been counting. Look, the first thing that Quigley said to me, the Attorney General outgoing, was that you'll get your seat. He was confident of that. The numbers are there. And I agree.
Yeah.
Secretly, I'm hoping for 3, expecting 3. I'd be surprised if you don't get 2. And some people are saying that the polls are suggesting we might even be a chance at 4. But 2 to 3, I think, is probably going to be reasonable.
I mean, Legalise Cannabis has got to be a pretty popular proposition, popular enough to get 1 in 10 people ticking a box for you.
Well, you think so. I mean, 79% of the people agree that we should decriminalise cannabis, but that same proportion of people also think we need to help with cost of living. I mean, and if cannabis is costing, say, 140 for 10 grams, I've got to put food on the table.
For sure. I mean, but obviously it sort of legalising cannabis does more than just provide a quick hit here and now.
That's the smallest part of it. If we were to take away the fear of THC, what do you think would happen? Then the hemp industry would be opened up because the stupid regulations, which are entirely unnecessary, would fall away. Then we could actually get the business going. Do you know, at this very moment, the ADF is building bullet and bomb-proof covers for their motors using carbon and hemp fibre?
No, did not know that.
And we could send this into space. We could use it for making roadside dust suppression, pet bedding, the fabrics you can make from it. You can cottonize it to make $200 shirts.
Sounds like a capitalist's dream. Where's the opposition coming from?
I've been struggling for 4 years to find out why people don't want that, and I don't know. Look, a crop of, say, in a good year, a yield of say, wheat, what I used to work in the wheat belt, $600, $700, $800 on a good year for a hectare. If you were to do the same with hemp, industrial hemp, you'd be getting, if you use the whole plant, about $23 million. So what is the problem? Do we not? We really ought to be looking at this differently as a potential. But what I did discover is that one of the reasons we don't move forward is that the government cannot tolerate innovation. Status quo is the standard.
Right.
And if not by the ministers who want to move, it's the unelected, highly paid civil servants. Think Yes Minister, think Utopia, whose only function is to keep things the way they are.
So how do you go with getting some of these messages and ideas into the media? I read recently that you were quite critical of the ABC because you weren't invited to the candidates forum. Do you find that you're able to get your message into the mainstream media?
Hardly. Mainstream media, almost never. When we do get the message out, they're always doing their best to make it laughable or insult us. And if they don't do that, even the headlines are going to be insulting. So people assume that cannabis is all about getting stoned and smoking cannabis on the street corner.
Have you got any idea why? Why would they seek to suppress or to dismiss or ridicule you?
Well, the narrative has been controlled by the government. You don't do what we say, we're not going to give you any drops. We're not going to give the information to you that you need to sell your paper, your copy. And so the big business doesn't really want cannabis there because why? We're a disruptor, perhaps. We've gone through a number of stages. 1, they're ignoring us. 2, they're laughing at us. 3, they're attacking us. Before 4, they accept us.
Yeah.
But then that's our work just started. You suggested before that once cannabis is legalized, the meaning for the party vanishes. Well, yes, we must move into the new age. We must move forward with a new name. It's cannabis front and center by all means, but now we need to actually make it known that there's so many areas where we're suffering. Today, for example, I was doing a telehealth and this woman wanted a letter for NDIS because she was unable, was in severe pain. She is unable, she's tried twice, to actually get NDIS to actually say anything but reject. So I suggested you need a social worker to help you because they know how to use these forms. Can you imagine they've set up a system where the ordinary person is unable to access what they need because the form is just too complex to use? Did someone plan that? Anyone thought about how Centrelink behaves? No, you can't have this. And you need an expert to guide you through the channels of Centrelink to get what you are owed.
And does the mainstream media sometimes feel like it's operating as a gatekeeper in a similar way?
Very much so, yes. Their function is to actually put out the two-party preferred. Now, I have to ask you, why is there an understanding that there's only two-party preferred choices? Any other vote's a wasted vote? Why is that seen to be normal?
You tell me.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't share that view.
I think that perception is becoming less, but it still exists. Yeah.
Well, the point is that that was put out there by the mainstream media, which is controlled by the two major parties who are funded by the businesses on both sides.
Brad Pettit got an invite, right, to that candidates forum?
He did, yes.
As a representative of the Greens. I mean, they've got one seat, you've got one seat. That does seem to me...
Oh, you've got two seats. Oh, yeah.
Well, you had two, yeah.
Well, the thing was that they only got one seat because of the voting system, which was definitely not right. So I'm glad that's been changed. That will be rectified this coming election, and I wish them all the best. But the reason I didn't get a seat there, or it was given ostensibly, was because there's no room on the platform.
Right.
When they wrote back and said, well, actually, what we meant to say was that because there's no legalised cannabis in the Assembly, therefore you can't make the laws happen. There's no legalised cannabis members in the Assembly because people don't know about us, they don't vote for us in the election. So it's a circular argument.
A circular thing, yeah, I understand that. So I do note that you have kind of been exploring the new media landscape. Last night as I was scrolling through TikTok, a video popped up on my feed of you with renowned Perth street interviewer, Mr. Sick Cunt.
Yep. He's a lovely man, by the way.
So how did that one come about? Did you reach out to him, or which way did it come?
Well, the way it appears, I was walking out in East Victoria Park, and he was coming the other way, very appropriate. Now, there had been discussions beforehand, of course, but that was the way it came across. And I have to say, I never knew him before, but I was thoroughly amazed. First of all, how nice he is, and secondly, how skillful he is, and how wonderful the team is. Beautiful. I loved it thoroughly.
So has that been, I mean, you've done Mr. Sick Cunt, you're here on The Last Place on Earth, you're kind of doing the rounds of new media. Is that a strategic thing for you to get your message through? Is that something that's been part of your strategy?
Yes, it has. We've looked at the smaller ones. Leo Polisi, for example, our Ivan Leung here in Perth, helping to get the news out. The different protests I've been to with the alternative news. But the mainstream media has done a massively successful job of keeping me out of the media, or indeed making me laughable.
Do you think that matters? How much do you think the general population is now engaged with the mainstream media versus new forms of media, independent news?
That is a hugely interesting question. And I think that the alternative media is coming out because the mainstream media is just not doing what it should do.
Yeah.
So the truth is being suppressed. And so the job that you are doing is fantastic. And that's listening to people and putting the word out there. You may not agree with it, but let's have a listen. And this is not what the media is doing. They're creating a plan. They're creating a story, and then they're expecting us to play to that tune. It's quite corrupt.
But I suppose my original question, I don't disagree with any of that. My original question was, how much do you think that matters in this day and age in 2025? I mean, obviously, I'm painfully aware the Premier's still reading the West Australian newspaper, but I'm not convinced that many West Australian voters aren't necessarily. I'm not saying they're necessarily listening to us either, but there's got to be a shifting spectrum in terms of the influence that various forms of media exert.
Well, you're hitting a major topic that I'll be discussing with my team in the near future, because I have been working on something to address this problem for the last year. Won't tell you about it, but I think in the coming the coming 6 months there should be some information coming out, because I am looking here at the disengagement from politics and seeing that people are simply giving up because there's misinformation, disinformation, a superfluity of information, and people just say, I can't do this anymore. Let's who won the game last night.
Yeah.
Now, what I have seen here is people going into the elections with their minds made up. That's nice. I'm assuming that's because you've thought long and hard about the options and you've come to a decision. But I suspect most of it isn't. And so, yes, I think it has a huge influence, because the mainstream media will also cause the alternative media to think about topics as well. So we need a balanced media. We need actually an open-minded media, not bound by the diktats of the oligarchs who own the media.
Yeah.
That's our problem.
So are you becoming a Twitch streamer? Is that your plan? Is that the big
Or are you buying Channel 10?
At my age, I think I'll just sit back and let someone else do the work.
Okay, well said.
Well, Dr. Brian Walker, thank you for joining us here at The Last Place on Earth. It's been a wide-ranging and illuminating conversation. So thanks for taking the time, and we'll see how things go on Saturday.
Thank you indeed. And make sure you board up the window so the bricks come flying through.
Oh, we're more than accustomed to that. Don't worry. That's the back door we've got to worry about. Notoriously leaky.
Stay safe, all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Alrighty, back announcing Brian Walker, Dr. Brian Walker from the Legalise Cannabis Party, a wide-ranging, freewheeling podcast guest.
For
I reckon.
sure. Yeah. The guy's made to podcast, really. And I noticed he's actually got his own. So
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
All
Hasn't done an episode for a while. But
Right, maybe he was one of those popular WA podcasts you were talking about before we had to take a quick trip to the edit room before the break. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's been a fairly, I don't know, what would you say? I'm lost for words, really. An empty campaign for the most part.
It
I would say.
hasn't made much of a mark.
I mean, it's got close at times. Even, I reckon, the prospect of Chinese warships steaming towards Garden Island with a US nuclear sub in Bay at the base down there was kind of on the cards for a day or two in your wildest dreams, and then they just sort of like disappeared like ships in the night and were kind of halfway to Indonesia before we even knew about it, really.
Yeah, you'd think they might have stuck around for the weekend, right? Could have been fun. But yeah, look, I mean, I do think, the Fremantle battle here is interesting. We'll see how that plays out
and then
on the
the
weekend.
upper house battle obviously may take a little more time to unfold. And obviously, this isn't the only election on the cards in Australia and in WA in coming days, weeks, months.
So do you think the federal election is going to be a little bit more interesting?
I mean, yeah, I fucking hope so. Obviously, as someone who kind of, trades in politics and the stuff that comes with it, you kind of got to hope that there's a bit more material to work with nationally than there has been within WA. And I think we've talked about this obviously almost incessantly for a long time, both on and off the air. But you'd kind of hope that WA's kingmaker role, if you will, at a national level will maybe come more into focus. And I mean, I think the state election this weekend's going to get completely blown off the radar, so to speak, by the tropical cyclone currently off the East Coast, soon to be on the East Coast. So I think it kind of says it all, really, that even election day itself is unlikely to really register at a national level. So maybe, conversely, it'll turn out that WA's time to shine kind of comes when the focus isn't just on us.
Yeah, and I think that's what presents more opportunities for people like us, at least, because there's that kind of wedge that develops. And, voters supposedly, according to all the narratives in the progressive inner cities in the eastern states, want different things from voters in WA. I mean, I don't necessarily know how true that is, but...
Well, at the very least, I think they want a different perspective to, like, people in WA. WA is just WA. Everyone's kind of, trapped in the dream, whatever. And that extends to both the media and, the consumers of media, whereas I think at least when you're talking about kind of national stories and the national narrative, WA may have a starring role in that currently, but it's kind of only when you zoom out a bit that you can really maybe like make out kind of exactly how that all works.
Well, certainly that was kind of the impression I had reading the story from Adam Morton this week in The Guardian about the gas industry in Western Australia, that an outsider's view really helps to kind of draw a few things into focus. And I thought that was quite a well done story.
Maybe that's it. Maybe to kind of like tell that the full sweep of kind of WA politics or recent political history, you kind of do need to like start from scratch basically and go, all right, no one knows what the fuck's going on over there. Let's just kind of like hit the real high notes all in one place, all at the same time. I thought Adam did a really pretty commendable job. Obviously has some solid local knowledge as well. Has spent some time out here. Hopefully more East Coast media make it over here in person. But if they don't, I guess they've always got us to fall back on.
That's right. Yeah,
the stringers.
Tried and tested. Yeah. I mean, I kind of can't see them doing that. Like they haven't,
like decamping here. You mean sending people?
They don't tend to, right? And I mean, I think things are getting more and more dire in the world of mainstream media. So it seems unlikely. I mean, I guess, Albo was meant to be here at the moment, I think today, but obviously he's over on cyclone duty. Yeah. If Albo and Dutton keep making their frequent trips over, which I'm sure they will, perhaps they'll have a few journos in tow.
tailing along with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if we can get any closer than we managed this afternoon with the local boss.
Look, it just seems unlikely. But, you know, I think that if they were to embrace us, that it could have benefits for them as well, you know. So I think that perhaps there's some missed opportunities.
You reckon there's any federal politicians we could get here? Any big fish?
Well, look, I was intrigued by the Senator Payman's announcement this week of Megan Krakauer as the lead Senate candidate. It'd be great to... I mean, I've spoken to Fatima Payman before in the Last Place on Earth, but it'd be great to get them both in here maybe and have a chat to them.
Yep. No, Megan well.
They're kind of obviously in the outsider camp.
Yeah. Are there any other interesting WA picks at this point? Anyone put their hands up?
Oh, I'm not really sure. I mean, another person who... no, it's not going to happen. I was going to say maybe we could try and get Kate Chaney here, but I find that perhaps unlikely. She wouldn't.
Hey, I mean, she's probably more comfortable coming to our place than vice versa. I would say.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a blank slate, right? Like, there's been a shadow campaign for months, but again, nothing too hot and heavy so far at a federal level, and it sounds like it's going to be a 4-week campaign. Yeah.
I think we could have quite a good time with Albo. I think Albo, we would actually we would hit it off. I mean...
Crack the ice.
Yeah.
Get beneath the surface.
Yeah, I think it could be good. I think Albo's a pretty good podcast guest. He was good on Abby Chatfield. I saw some clips of him on some cricket podcast that he did the other day. So
right.
He's clearly kind of doing the rounds.
What about Dutton?
Look, I mean, I'd be happy to kind of have a chat to Dutton. To be honest, I haven't really looked too closely at any of his long-form interviews.
Appearances, no.
He's just like not a very compelling figure to me personally. I don't find him that interesting.
No, it's good. It's sort of the darkness that reveals the light, and it's kind of the shadow of Peter Dutton is kind of more interesting than the man himself.
Exactly.
In many ways.
Yeah.
What about Clive? How do you think he'd go on the couch?
Look, I would. I think it would be a great time. I've
honestly, it's so long since he was last actually in Parliament or kind of like doing the rounds in person. I do remember a radio interview we did a few years back with probably the ABC where he ended up hanging up on them.
Right.
Having quite a sort of fit of peak, which is pretty entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to talk to Clive around the time that he came here with Tucker, and his media people did get back to me and just said that he was busy and that he was unavailable.
Right.
But... I think it could be great to hear about the trumpet of patriots. That could be a really good time. I mean, Pauline Hanson, I think she'd probably do it.
Yeah, Pauline would be good.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, your Jackie Lambies, maybe Lydia. We could get Lydia potentially. She's not running for re-election, so probably no need. I think she'd probably be keen to get a bit of R&R over the next couple of months.
Yeah, but she might have some illuminating kind of insights into
unquestionably, no
how
doubt.
things go down and all the rest. Yeah.
All right. Well, much to look forward to.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Well. If our listeners have ideas of what you'd like us to do for the federal election, get in touch.
And if you want to come on, or if you know someone who should,
that's
let
right.
us know as well.
Yeah, if you've got anyone who you think has
open.
something interesting to say, it doesn't necessarily have to be in Parliament or aspiring to be in Parliament. www.lastplaceonearth.com.au. You can subscribe there, get the weekly wrap as well as this almost weekly podcast. And whatever else is there for the offering as well.
Yeah, it's a tough job, but someone has got to put in the hours. All right.
Enjoy Saturday. Have a good time, everyone out there.
Whichever election party you're going to.
Yeah.
Hope it is a successful night for you and yours.